Hello and welcome to Proof Through You. This month we are talking about our new series, which is all about friendships. We are walking through the Bible, looking at different types of friendships so that we can determine how God's faithfulness can be proved through our friendships that He has blessed us to have. So, this is part two. If you have not seen the first one, we talked about David and Jonathan. Hop on over to my channel and check out that video to see how that unlikely friendship was able to be used for God's glory and our benefit. So, as we begin to talk about this particular relationship, relationship number two, here are a few questions I want us to ponder and think about during our time together. Does perspective have an impact on friendships? The way one person views something, do you believe that it could have an impact on your friendship? Because 2 plus 2 equals 4, but so does 3 plus 1, so does 0 plus 4. So is it possible that our perspectives have a way of impacting our friendships? The next question is, what about our life experiences? Do what we go through or what we've experienced in life, does that have an impact on our friendships? So if I had one upbringing and you had another upbringing, if I'm an only child and you are the youngest or the middle or the oldest because you have other siblings, do our life experiences such as layoffs, car accidents, heartbreak, and things of that nature, do those impact our friendships as well? And what about character? Do you believe that somebody's character matters in a friendship? Does it matter how they treat people who they feel are less fortunate? Does it matter if they are judgmental? Does it matter if they decide to show grace or if they decide to display bitterness? Does their character truly matter in what we're looking for in a friendship? And finally, I want us to think about, can a lifelong friendship begin at any stage in life? A lot of times when we think about lifelong friends, we are usually thinking of someone that we met in kindergarten or middle school or high school. But when we begin to look at this lifelong friendship, is it possible that a lifelong friendship can begin at any age of your life? Last week's story was called The Unlikely Friendship, and it was the friendship that we explored between David and Jonathan. This week, we're going to talk about two ladies by the name of Ruth and Naomi, and today's lesson is going to be called Faithful in Law. Okay, so this is the name of their friendship. And I really think it's a great story because it helps address certain rumors. And I know that in-laws get a bad rep. Sometimes there are so many horror stories, but I was glad that in this particular story, we see a pleasant outcome, a pleasant friendship and relationship between in-laws. And their story is found in the book of Ruth. It's a very short book in the Bible. It's only 4 chapters, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It could be a quick read, or if you decide to, study it for a week, it probably would last a week or so. But again, it's found in the book of Ruth. And where do we meet them? Much isn't known about their background story, but when we do meet them, it's unfortunately during a tragic moment for them both. Naomi's husband has passed away, as well as her 2 sons have passed away. Now, Ruth was one of Naomi's daughter-in-laws, and during this time, there was not much protection or provision or inheritance for women, especially widows. They were left unprotected. And so Naomi decides she's going to go back to her hometown so that maybe she can find solace with her people, but she's encouraging her 2 daughter-in-laws to not follow her and to go back to their home where their family could protect them and provide for them. So what ends up happening is Ruth decides she wants to stay with Naomi. She doesn't want her mother-in-law by herself. She's found out some things about her mother-in-law, and she decides, she's very, very determined that nothing is going to separate her from her mother-in-law. But how did life experiences impact their friendships? Because they were both widows, so they're both grieving the loss of a loved one, but Naomi, not only did she lose her husband, she also lost her children. So those are two different life perspectives. Naomi's a little bit older, so she knows what it is to be a mother. She knows what it is to be a wife. She knows what it is to maintain and sustain a marriage. She knows what it is to run a household. She has that type of life experience, whereas Ruth is still fairly young. She was young enough to be remarried. She was young enough to be able to have children herself, but they both are in this friendship where they now have both experienced loss. They both have no inheritance that in that time they were allowed to maintain. Because again, the blessing and the property and the land was passed from male to male. So from father to son to brother, or if there was no son, then it was going to the brother. If there's no brother, then it goes to the uncle. But it was very uncommon for women to inherit land and property, although there is a story in the Bible that talks about that, but that's a different scenario than the one that we have here. And so their life experiences shaped their perspective on where they were in life, and it almost impacted their friendship. So on the way back to Naomi's hometown, the people were excited to see her because they knew who she was, and they were like, "Hi, Naomi," and she's like, "Pump your brakes. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because I'm now bitter." Because she was not happy about where she currently found herself in life in this season. But have no fear, her story does get better. But during this entire time, Ruth has decided that she's going to stay by her side. And I couldn't help but wonder, why is that? What type of friendship did Naomi offer to Ruth? What was it about Naomi that Ruth just clung to? You know, was it her worship? Was it her prayer style? Was it the way she communicated? Was it the way she was able to resolve conflict? There was something nurturing and loving about Naomi that Ruth decided that she was not going to let Naomi continue out life by herself. She was determined to be there with her. And I think this is a good part in their friendship, because the Bible teaches us that God will place even the lonely in families. So even if your natural family or the family that you were born into, maybe they don't appreciate you, or maybe they mistreat you, or maybe you've never even met them, but that doesn't have to be where your story ends, because God places the lonely in families. And so I believe this is a great example of how he allowed a tragic situation to begin to blossom into a beautiful relationship and friendship. So was God's faithfulness proven in the friendship of Ruth and Naomi? Well, as you continue to read the story of Ruth, the book of Ruth, it tells us how God was able to lead them to their guardian redeemer, which is someone who was close enough to them to redeem them. He was someone who could guard them. He was someone who could redeem their property, their land, their name, and offer them protection. And this man's name was Boaz. Okay, in the same way that God led them to their guardian redeemer, we are to be reminded that God is that for us through his son, Jesus Christ. Jesus was our guardian redeemer. He came to redeem us. He came to give us his name. That's why we're called Christians, because we're followers of Christ. Not only that, but we have God's protection, his provision, and his love. But God was able to show his faithfulness through Boaz, because Boaz was kind, he was compassionate, he was generous, he was honorable enough to cover them in a time when widows were not even allowed to inherit. But why did he do this? The story goes on to tell us that it was because of Ruth's character that he began to take notice of her. Because when he noticed her, he told the workers of his field, because he owned the field, he said, "Don't bother her. Let her glean behind the other workers. And as a matter of fact, give her something extra to pick up." Because in a time where Ruth could have been selfish and just thought about herself and only feeding herself, she decided to be selfless and to secure food for not only herself, but also her mother-in-law. And that information made her well known in the town. So you have to remember, Ruth is the one coming into a new town, a new situation that's unfamiliar to her, but Naomi is the one who's used to those surroundings. She knows the people, she knows the area, but it's because of Ruth's serving, her heart to serve her and her mother-in-law, she was able to be noticed by a wealthy, generous, compassionate, honorable man in the town. But also in their friendship, not only is Ruth serving Naomi, but Naomi is also serving Ruth. She's teaching her the ways of her land. She's teaching her how to fit in. She's teaching her how to be able to go out and provide for herself, because ultimately that's what they were left to do until they found out that they had a guardian redeemer. So God's faithfulness was able to be proven in their friendship because they were humble towards each other, they were loving towards each other, they were kind towards each other. Now, one of the questions that we talked about in the beginning is, can a lifelong friendship happen at any age and stage in life? And this story proves that it can, because Ruth and Naomi go on to become lifelong friends. And it does not say that Ruth and Naomi's were A1s from day ones. It just simply picks up when they became in-laws together. So it is possible to have a new relationship later on in life that ends up being a lifelong relationship. And not only was it a lifelong friendship, but Ruth had a son by the name of Obed. Obed had a son whose name was Jesse, and Jesse had a son whose name was David. The same David that was in the unlikely friendship that we talked about in our previous series, in our previous message, that's who her great-great-grandson was. And the story goes on to say that Ruth and Naomi were able to remain friends, and she was blessed to have another child, which was Naomi's grandchild. And her faith was restored back unto her in that moment and throughout that season. So be encouraged in your friendships with your in-laws. God is still able to make all things work together for the good of them who love him and who are the called according to his glory. Now, the central scripture for this one is found in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, and it's where Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." This is how dedicated Ruth was to staying with her mother-in-law. Okay, so there is beauty in clinging to the unknown. There is beauty to trusting God in the unknown. Because what started as a very bleak and sad and tragic situation, God used that and turned it around to bless them both. To bless them both and to be able to provide for them shelter and provision. So I never want to leave you with just pondering questions. We also want to have next steps, because as we're talking about friendships, it's one thing for us to uncover some of our friendships. It's one thing for us to uncover our character and our mindset around friendships. But after we have the discussion, let's take some practical steps. So here are some things that we can take to God in prayer. We can ask God to help us with our expectations. We can ask God to help us to release unspoken feelings. And we can ask God to give us a willingness to learn. So if you're already married, or if you are engaged to be married, begin to ask God to guide you and guard your expectations of what your mother-in-law or your daughter-in-law relationship would be like. Sometimes when we enter into new relationships, we take our old baggage, our old experience, or we take someone else's advice into the relationship with us. But if you ask God to help you and give you to guidance, be ready and willing for him to reveal exactly what you can expect as you enter into that relationship with a mother-in-law, a daughter-in-law, a father-in-law, a son-in-law, and ask him to help you to guide your expectations. Now, when it comes to the release of unspoken feelings, in the beginning, Naomi just told people who were welcoming her back, she said, hey, no, just call me Mara. I'm bitter. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. Don't greet me with joy because I'm in a big mood, okay? So as you are beginning to think about your feelings, or as those feelings and doubts, questions and concerns pop up, ask God to help you to learn how to communicate those feelings. So yes, what you may be feeling may be true, but there's always a way to communicate truth. And God reminds us to be gracious and loving when we speak truth to people. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be condescending. You don't have to be mean to keep it 100. You can be truthful in a gracious way. Now, sometimes, okay, there may have to be some tough love, but initially, as you are working on that faithful in-law friendship, try to speak your words with grace and kindness. So that way, it's harder for you to cause offense or to cause retaliation. It's hard for someone to argue with love. It's hard for someone to argue with grace when it's consistent and sincere. And then again, ask God to give you a willingness to learn. Seek to learn from your in-laws, whether that's the mother, the father, the daughter, or the sister, because each generation can offer wisdom and guidance during different seasons of your marriage and different seasons during your life. And God has allowed you to cross paths with that person for a reason. Now, I don't know the reason, and the reason may not have yet been revealed to you, but that's why we are asking God in prayer to help us manage our expectations, our feelings, and to give us a willingness to learn from those who we are now connected to. And you know, I believe in journaling. I always want to encourage you to just get a pen and paper so that you can write these things down and reflect on what you've learned, reflect on how God begins to move. So in this gratitude journal that we're talking about when we're looking at the faithful in-law friendships, I would encourage you to keep a journal of gratitude. Keep a list of things that you can be grateful for within that in-law relationship. And it doesn't have to be a long list of things, but just write down the things that you are grateful for, because this will then take your mind off of the things that you lack, and it will help you to remember how blessed you are in the situation. Some days you may have to look a little bit harder than others, but there's always something for you to be grateful for in each and every day. The next thing that we can journal is the changes. Make note of the big and small changes that you begin to notice within your friendship with your in-laws, and take note of how God is moving and shifting. Take note of God's faithfulness. And again, it could be something big, it could be something small. Maybe finally they're saying good morning, good afternoon, or maybe they're offering a little bit more guidance, or maybe this week they didn't have as much criticism to offer, and instead they invited you to Bible study, or they invited you over for dinner, or they invited you out for coffee and tea. Whatever it is, make sure you write it down. Begin to take notice of those small changes. And then finally, I encourage you to journal God's guidance. As you begin to pray, write down whatever you believe God is prompting you to say or do, so that number one, you can begin to learn his voice, and you will begin to be a little bit more confident in your actions when it comes to your friendship with your in-laws. Because if God is guiding you to do something, you can be sure that it's going to work out for your good and his glory. Now that we've had a chance to talk about the faithful in-laws, I want to give you a few ways that you can contact me here online. So as always, feel free to leave a comment. You can even share this video if you believe that it is helpful for somebody else, or save the video if you feel like this is something that you can come back and reference for yourself. If you find yourself interested in more of our content, you can locate my channel here on YouTube at Prove Through You. And we also have a financial basics series as well. That was our series for last month. There's a playlist on my channel as well. So if you are looking for a way to learn more about financial basics, make sure that you head over and check that out as you start your budgeting journey. If you're looking for us on Instagram, it is at Prove Through You, and over there we have short clips and reels. It's nothing in depth like we do here on YouTube, but I would love to have you follow me as we begin to do new things this month. And then if you're a little bit shy or you just have a personal testimony and you would like to remain anonymous, feel free to email me over at provethroughyou@gmail.com. Our next friendship video is going to be posted later on this month, and I thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have an amazing day, and God bless.